Hey everybody, Ben for the Bonehead podcast, and welcome to Blood Bowl Team Guides Vampires. So, the Vampire team is on its way out. It's either up for pre-order right now or it's been released, and we've been waiting for this one for a while. They have been brought back from the dead appropriately. So, Vampires had a Team of Legend fill-in roster for Blood Bowl 2020, and now they've been brought up to date. We've got new positionals, we've got new skills, and realistically, we've got a new team that feels like the old team. It's pretty cool, it's very different, but you still get that classic vampire feel. So this is the spotlight. We're going to look at the team overall, the roster, the players, the skill access, and the star player access as well. So if you are thinking about running vampires, this is a great intro point for that. Now, it's not a standalone video. We've also got our team rosters, our tournament rosters, our player development video, and we'll have a setup video as well for vampires coming soon. But for now, let's dive into the new vampire roster. Okay, so vampires are now kind of as they've always been. You've got vampires and you've got thralls. The vampires are supreme. They are stronger, faster, and more agile than basically most other races. There's some caveats to that, but generally speaking, vampires are vampires. And vampires like to drink blood. So you've got vampire players with Bloodlust, and you've got the thralls who are the blood bags. So the way this team plays is you need to orchestrate every turn, planning on a vampire essentially needing a snack. Now we're going to look at the Bloodlust rule in detail in a second because it is a founding part of how you run this team. But that kind of vampire vibe was taken away with the Team of Legend. They had animal savagery and it kind of worked, but it wasn't as thematic as the old version. The old version's theme is back to quite a big extent, and we've got some fun new things too. So it's kind of like vampires of old, just brought up to a modern, exciting Blood Bowl team. So a couple of things about the core vampire team before we look at Bloodlust and the players themselves. Rerolls, 60k, tier 2 team. Tier 2 is going to be interesting. Old school vampires, and I'm not talking Blood Bowl 2020, I'm talking pre-2020. They were one of the worst teams in Blood Bowl. That Bloodlust made it so challenging that they would essentially either perform stellar Blood Bowl or just eat themselves into oblivion. It's looking like the rules are going to be that way inclined, but with the positionals and with Bloodlust being a little bit better now, actually, we're thinking probably not the bottom of tier 2, but a little bit higher. So actually, probably where vampires should be. They are the team that rewards well played, well managed, and well decided actual tabletop decisions, I think, more than any others. Think Tomb Kings, Nurgle, those teams that you want to position really well and your team and your players kind of combo off each other. Vampires sit within that challenging category of can win loads but can hurt you lots. They do get apothecaries, which is going to be really useful. You've only got a couple of vampires really on your roster, and you want them to brew up and you want them to survive, and having that Apo is just going to keep them leveling up, because once they start leveling up, this team is just fantastic. A couple of special rules there for you. We've got the Sylvanian Spotlight rule, so they are an undead team. They can use Wilhelm Chaney, Bryce the Slice, Skrull, stuff like that, and their new star players also play for Sylvanian Spotlight. So if you've got an undead team or a necro team, the new vampire players will be able to play for you. Now, they've also got a rule called Vampire Lord, which means if they kill a dude, they can resurrect him as a thrall. I'll have to double check the rules on that in a second, but let's have a look at Bloodlust first. Okay, so Bloodlust is a bit of a wordy skill, but that's okay. So, to keep control of their wits, vampires need a supply of fresh blood. Whenever a player with this trait activates after declaring their action, they must roll a d6, adding +1 if they declared a block or blitz action. So when you come to move your vampire, you go, right, I'm going to activate him. He's going to perform a move action or a pass action or a block or blitz, because you get +1. So a Bloodlust 2+ is always going to be working on 2+. A player with Bloodlust 3+ is going to be 3+ to move or pass, but is going to be a 2+ to block or blitz. Kind of similar to animal savagery and some of the other nega traits that we see in the game. If they roll equal to or higher than the number shown in brackets, they are good to go. So you hit that 2+, 3+ Bloodlust, you just carry on on your merry little life without any worries. If you fail, so if the player rolls lower than the number shown in brackets or rolls a natural 1, they may continue their activation as normal, though they may change their declared action to a move action if they wish. If the player declared an action that can only be performed once per team, such as a blitz or pass, this will still count as that action for the team turn. At the end of their activation, they may bite an adjacent Thrall lineman. So, you declare blitz or pass and you fail your Bloodlust, you can choose to change it to a simple move action instead. If you do, the blitz and the pass or whatever you've declared has been used up. So think about it, you know, you're blitzing with a Bonehead blitz, right? You blitz with the ogre, you fail the Bonehead, the activation is lost. In this case, you blitz with the vampire, you fail the activation, you can then change that to a move, but you don't get to use that blitz anywhere else. Then, at the end of your activation, if you are adjacent to a Thrall, even if they're on the ground, standing, prone or stunned, you bite them. If you bite a Thrall, immediately make an injury roll for the Thrall, treating any casualty result as badly hurt. So you ignore armor. You automatically break armor and you go straight through to stunned, KO, or casualty, which will only be a badly hurt. And you won't get SPP for that. And we're not sure if Mighty Blow stacks with that at the moment. We're expecting that to be an FAQ. I would imagine that it won't, but that'll be brutal if it does. This will not cause a turnover unless the Thrall was holding the ball. If you wander up and bite the Thrall with the ball and they stun themselves, the ball pops out, it's a turnover. If you pass your Bloodlust, it's not a turnover. If you chomp a Thrall that doesn't have the ball, it's not a turnover. If you do not bite a Thrall for any reason, then a turnover is caused. So the player will lose their tackle zone until they're next activated and will immediately drop the ball if they're holding it. So they just space out into oblivion. That is a huge thing for you to have to play around. Now, in theory, it's easy. Just make sure there are Thralls around so I can end my Vampire's activation next to a Thrall, chomp the Thrall, everything is fine. The problem is every time you chomp a Thrall, you risk KOing them or casualtying them. So your amount of Thralls on the pitch will start to dwindle, and that could start to cause more and more turnovers. And that's what I mean by they eat themselves into oblivion. It's a really interesting team to play. If a player was in the end zone, no touchdown is scored. If a player who failed this role wants to make a pass action, handoff or score, they must bite a Thrall before they perform that action or score. So if you go, right, my thrower is going to make a pass action and you roll Bloodlust, you need to wander over and bite a Thrall before you get to make that pass action, before you get to make that handoff action. Now you can just change it to a move action, but you'll be doing the same thing anyway, wandering over and biting a Thrall. The huge thing there is that if a vampire fails Bloodlust, it's going to be a turnover unless you bite a Thrall. And if you got the ball, you drop it. It's absolutely massive. So Bloodlust is super thematic. It's how the vampires used to play it. It was part of their charm. It was like, I've got to work around this mechanic because, as we're about to see, all of the players have got great stats, great skills, and well, not great skills, but great stats. You've just got to work around it. So just a quick one on the Vampire Lord's special skill. If you kill a player on the opposing team who's strength 4 or less, do they have stunty? Just strength 4 or less that does not have regen or stunty. If they suffer a casualty result of 15 or 16 dead and they have not been saved by an apothecary, you can hire a Thrall for free, which is really cool. Now the other undead teams can summon zombies, they can summon skeletons. These guys can summon Thralls. I like that. It really kind of shows the fact that their vampire, smashes them, but then gives them the kiss of death, and then they come back as a Thrall, and they kind of allure to the vampire thing. Again, another massive theme win. But that is the vampire team overall. Let's have a look at each of the players on the team. And the players on the team are here. So you get 0 to 16 Thrall linemen, the blood bags, right? The food for the team. As a stat line we'll look at in a minute, they're pretty good. They're very cheap, but they're there to be eaten by the vampires. And this is where it gets good. So 0 to 2 vampire throwers. Yes, we're talking pass 2+ with pass. Still got strength 4, still edge 2+. Still awesome. Then we've got 0 to 2 vampire blitzers. Now these are also strength 4, edge 2+, but they've got Juggernaut as a starting skill. But their Bloodlust is a little bit worse. Their Bloodlust 3+. So the idea is that they are giving in to the beast within. They're giving in to their rage, so they're very happy to punch things, but they struggle a little bit to focus on doing things like score touchdowns and move around. They want to be hurting things. Then we've got our movement 8 vampires. So 0 to 2 runners. Movement 8. They are only strength 3. They're still edge 2+. They've still got regen. They've still got hypnogaze. They've still got bloodlust 2+. but they are fast. So the standard vampire of old was movement 6. This guy, gal, vampire, movement 8. So much faster, but only strength 3, definitely weaker than before. However, if I tell you that this player is basically just an elven catcher or a high elf catcher, you need to kind of think, okay, do you know what? I'm fine with that because they are brilliant players, and the vampire runner here, that movement 8 is going to give you some serious breakout speed, and with a bit of brewing, a potential 1-turn touchdown piece as well, which is very, very, very fun. And we've got a big guy. We've got the Vargeist, or the Bat Ogre, if you want to give it a colloquialism. It's kind of like a Yeti. We've got claws, we've got frenzy, we've got strength 5, and it is bloodlust 3+ as well. So if you want to wander around with it, it's going to be a little bit slower, but if you want to murder things with it, it's just as good as Bonehead. Except if you fail and there's no one to bite, it will cause you a turnover, and the Vargeist has Loner 4+, which means you're not going to be saved by your rerolls. So those are the various components of the team. And I'm not going to jump into the full rosters or starting rosters here. That's a separate video. But this is not the kind of team where you want to take all the positionals. Most other teams in Blood Bowl, you want the full lineup, right? Whether you start with it, or you end up having to add over time. Khorne, Nobility, they're both teams where you have to make some choices at the beginning, and then over the course of a league, you fill the roster out. You are probably never going to field 7 vampires, and if you do, it's probably not going to go brilliantly for you. This is the Thunderbird 2 of Blood Bowl teams. You start with a core of your vampires, and you add bits depending on what's going on in your league or your tournament. If you're in a fast league, you're going to want more runners. If you're in a bashy league, you're going to want more blitzers, or maybe the Vargeist to be there to take the punches and to punch back. Probably looking at 5 vampires max for this roster. You can stretch it up to 6 once your team becomes well skilled up with pro everywhere and stuff like that. But to begin with, probably 4 or 5 vampires is all you're going to need, which gives you some choices. Now, we should probably have a look and see what those choices are. And the first choice, and my personal favourite, is the Vampire Thrower. And contrary to popular belief, not the best thrower in the game. I'm going to say the second best thrower in the game, because the Skaven thrower is best, as we all know. So, 0 to 2 Vampire Throwers. Stat line is not bad. Movement 6 is average. Strength 4 is wonderful. Edge 2+ is also wonderful. Passing 2+ is wonderful again. Armor 9+ is pretty resilient. It's not 10+, it's not a dwarf, it's not 11+, he's not a tree man, but a 9+ is the same armor as most blitzers on most teams. So that's pretty resilient, and especially at strength 4. He's not gonna get 2-die blocked as frequently as every other thrower in the game. So this guy is rough and tough. This is the Josh Allen of Blood Bowl. He's going to be able to knock you over, and he's going to be able to take a hit, and he's also going to be able to swing a brilliant pass. So 110k, Bloodlust 2+, exactly what we're expecting for this team. He's got pass, so this guy is pass 2++ here. So quick passes 2+ with a reroll, short passes 3+ with a reroll. That's very good. That is as good as it gets. Okay, we've also got Hypno Gaze on all of the vampires in this team except the Vargeist. I'm not going to talk too much about Hypno Gaze, but it is another key part of running the vampire roster. The idea is that you base up with a vampire, and instead of punching, instead of doing anything else, you Hypno Gaze the target, taking an agility test. If you pass, they lose their tackle zones. Now that's massive for 2 reasons. One, it means you can blitz past them, you can wander past them, and it's often the best way to get to the side of a cage. So with these vampires, I'm thinking the thrower or the runner tags on the side of a cage, Hypno Gaze, takes away their tackle zone, and you use the Blitzer or the Vargeist to blitz into that cage and nuke the ball carrier. Easy, right? It's not bad. The other thing is, if you don't have a tackle zone, most skills turn off. So if you really, really want to murder a Wood Elf War Dancer, you go up, you Hypno Gaze them, block and dodge stop working, and then you just nuke them with any of your strength 4 or 5 pieces. Fantastic. So that's the same for all the vampires, and it's really more of a way it's just another piece of the toolkit here that I just think is underrated and is going to be very, very, very potent. So anyway, back on the thrower, 110k, Bloodlust 2+, and pass with passing 2+. Hypno Gaze, just a genuinely useful skill, with the downside that you're based against somebody next turn. That's okay. and we've got regeneration. So this strength 4 armor 9+ piece, if you do smack them into oblivion and injure them, they can just regen themselves back together again, and they are back in reserves and they are good to go. So they are resilient. Obviously it's Blood Bowl, and Blood Bowl is the best game in the world for teaching someone about loss and how not to love things, but it's a pretty potent combination. So skills for this guy: primary, agility, general, and passing. Strength on secondary. That is something that is a bit of a change, because if you want a bit of guard, you are going to be limited on the players you can take guard with general skills here. But this guy wants all the vampires do brilliantly with a couple of skills. You may have heard of them: block, dodge. They're both excellent skills when you've got strength 4 or edge 2+. If you put dodge on a vampire thrower, you've got that 2++ into the open. It's fantastic. If you put block on the vampire thrower, you've got a strength 4 blitzer. You've got good armor, you've got great strength, and you've got a combat skill. So the vampire thrower not only can throw all of the time, but you put block, you put dodge, they become maneuverable and they become more dangerous. But I imagine what we're going to see as a very, very popular pick for all of the vampires is Pro. Now, Pro is a skill that lets you re-roll a single die roll once per turn per player that has the Pro skill if they roll a 3+. And the reason that Pro is such a useful skill is because if you fail your Bloodlust, you can just try and re-roll it. Okay, most Bloodlust for most of your activations is going to be a 2+. So if you get that 1, you can try your Pro test, and on a 3+, you re-roll it, and you are almost guaranteed, well, it's Blood Bowl, to fail it again, but statistically, that Pro should save you. So it goes from a 1 in 6 to like a, what, 1 in 18 chance of it failing? That keeps you way more consistent. And if you don't need to use Pro to activate your vampire, but you make a dodge test and it goes wrong, you've got a 2-die block and they're both skulls, you can use that Pro to reroll one of your skulls. You can use that Pro to try and reroll a failed dodge test. It just keeps your players way more consistent. It's not the most exciting skill in the world, but I do think that that's going to be a very useful skill on all of the vampires very early on. It just keeps them moving. And if you can, cut the amount of Bloodlust failures you get by 2/3, I mean, that's an absolute game changer. So even though the thrower is built like a thrower and has 2++ to pass, you don't need to focus too much on the throwing skills with the thrower. Pro is best. Now, it depends on how you want to play vampires. If you want to be a gunslinger with this, then accurate's going to make you a 1++ quick pass, which is just magnificent. And you've got leader to give you another reroll onto your team to help with Bloodlust. You've got on the ball to give you movement 9 when you're receiving, extra bit of movement. There's a ton of great skills in every one of those categories, but I think you start with Pro, get that player working all the time. Yes, block is great. Yes, dodge is great. But being able to use my thrower every turn of the game without actually having to deal with the vampirism, it's just kind of broken. If you want to save up for double, you can go for something like Mighty Blow or Guard. Guard is going to be useful in this team, but you get that general access on the Blitzers, so the thrower is kind of your standard vampire, your jack of all trades, and your king of passes. And talking of the vampire Blitzer, we've got these guys. So 0 to 2, they are also 110k. They are also movement 6. They're also movement strength 4. They're also edge 2+. So you've got the core bit of vampirism there, being stronger and more agile than humans. Tick, tick, tick. Passing 5+. Blitzers are not the best at throwing. Actually, in this edition, there are a few that are great at throwing, and these Blitzers are not those. And they've got armor 9+, which is actually, like we said, pretty standard, pretty resilient. So 110k, these guys get access to Bloodlust 3+, which is worse than the thrower, unless you're blocking or blitzing, because then it goes to 2+. So as long as your vampire blitzer is in combat, or you're willing to sacrifice a blitz action to give you that +1 to activate, you're going to be good as gold with the vampire blitzer. So even though it is a little bit like, it's a 3+ to move, just blitz. It's going to be fine. Then you've got Juggernaut. So when you do blitz with your vampire blitzer to activate on a 2+ instead of a 3+, you get to turn both down into a push. Now, that is not the best thing in the world, but it's going to keep you standing a lot of times. And there's some brilliant little combos you can do with that, which we'll talk about when we talk about skills. These guys have also got Hypnogaze and mixed in with Edge 2+. That's very effective. So if your vampire blitzers can't quite reach, then you can also use them to Hypnogaze. But bear in mind, Hypnogaze is not a combat action, so it's going to be a move. which is a 3+ activation for your blitzers. So what you're going to see is Hypnogaze on your runners and your throwers, with a blitzer or a Vargeist taking their kind of opportunity to run in there and punch something. And with these guys activating on 2+ on a blitz, and with them having jugs, it makes a lot of sense. Again, regen's going to keep these guys active. So 110k, great stat line, good skill set, AGS on their action. They can't get passing skills. But when it comes to skills, everything I said about the thrower is really true of the Vampire Blitzer too. Pro is going to keep them active, it's going to help, but with the Blitzer, you are going to be punching more often, so block might not be the worst thing. And the reason I say that is because your Vampire Blitzers might just kind of orientate to being in the lineup, to being on the line of scrimmage. They've got reasonable armor, they've got regen, they're good strength, and they want to be in the combat. So having a Vampire Blitzer activate with a block of 2+ without having to use your blitz is going to be beneficial. They're resilient, they're strong, and you want them to be punching, because the more they punch, the more SPPs they'll get. So your Vampire Blitzer might benefit from getting block because it also helps on defense. But Pro is going to keep them more active more of the time as well. And everything I just said about the throw is true of dice pools, of just re-rolling that dodge, re-rolling that pickup when you need to. Pro is going to be really good at keeping them active. But block is way up the list for the blitzers here. Now, these guys do get strength access on a normal. So apart from the Varg, this is the only way to get that easy guard. Strength 4 is pretty good, but having a cheeky bit of guard is very useful. Also, we're looking at Mighty Blow here. There's no Mighty Blow on this team. Vampire Blitzers are begging for Mighty Blow. Now, because they've got good edge, the reasonable movement and good strength, you should be farming SPP with these guys reasonably well. A 2+ edge should be able to get you out of dodge and into the end zone a couple of times, so you will be able to burn up a bit of that. If you get Pro, they're going to be more consistent. You get block, they're going to be blocking better. And then there's one skill that is really, really tempting, and I like this for the Vampire Blitzer. You're blitzing with Juggernaut. It turns it both down into a push. If you take Strip Ball, a push will pop the ball out from your target. So you move a vampire onto the side of a cage. You hypno-gauge that side of the cage. You blitz in with Vampire Blitzer with Strip Ball. 2 dice, you're going to power them, you're going to push them. You've got jugs if it's a both down. You take that, you push them back, the ball pops out, and then one of your other vampires can run around and collect the ball. So Strip Ball is a brilliant skill on your Blitzer. If you're thinking league, if you're thinking long term, then obviously Pro is going to keep them just more active more often. But Strip Ball is a beautiful choice of skill for the Vampire Blitzer. So my dream Blitzer, from the looks of it, is Pro, Block, Mighty Blow, or Strip Ball, or Frenzy if you want to run them as a little Vargeist. This is your combat piece. They are handicapped by Bloodlust 3+, but really, you just want to give them stuff to fight with. And the weakest of the vampires is also pretty decent too. So this is the Vampire Runner. You get 0 to 2 of these. They're slightly cheaper at 100k, and they are much faster at movement 8. The downside of these is they are only strength 3. Now, there's been some in the community that is like, no, they're weak, they're fragile. Hey, as a Skaven coach, anything that's movement 8 and strength 3 is a threat to my gutter runners, and quite frankly, they're built like elven catchers. They do have regen as well, so actually they're fine. So movement 8 is fantastic, strength 3 is average, edge 2+ is again really good, passing 4+ is useful sometimes. It won't be your primary strategy, but 50% of the time it works all the time. Armor 8+ is going to leave these vampires be a bit vulnerable. Now, with that strength decrease and that armor decrease, your vampire runners are not built to put on the line. They're built to run around the sides of the line. Now, strength 3 is going to give you a nice 1-die hit on most ball carriers. That's still better than most fast edge players on other teams. They're normally punching up, so actually having strength 3 is really not that bad, but it will make you vulnerable when you compare to the rest of the team. Rest of the team, strength 4, armor 9+. This guy, strength 3, armor 8+, is more vulnerable. But you got Bloodlust 2+, so you're still activating and doing things with this runner almost all of the time. You've got Hypnogaze, and with movement 8 and edge 2+, that gives you a huge sphere of just difficulty for your opponent. You move that runner anywhere you want to go. You move the thrower in and Hypnogaze. You use the runner to Hypnogaze. You've got a potential fast player to either take a corner off a cage or pick up the ball when it pops out. Think and expect to plan for really big turns with vampires, because you've got the potential to just switch off some players and end them too. So Got regeneration, it's going to keep them from just dying again because they're vampires. Skills wise, Edge general on normals, and then passing and secondary on passing and strength on your secondary. So you can use a double to get a bit of guard or a bit of mighty blow. Probably wouldn't on the vampire runner because you don't want them in the thick of things. Passing on a double, we're going to talk about that really quick because we've talked about elven catchers, movement 8, strength 3, nerves of steel. If you do want to go full vampire throwing game, then saving up some SPP and getting one of these vampire runners, nerves of steel, is going to be fantastic. It's going to be so much fun. It's probably not a priority. I think vampires are going to have the short dink and dunk Drew Brees kind of passing game, and because of the way you kind of got to control your team with the thralls, you're just going to like move up into the middle zone of your opponent's back half and then break out with a fast run to score, which is where your vampire runner is set. Agility and general on primary. So dodge is wonderful with a movement 8 piece. You've got strength 3, so block is going to help you survive. It will also occasionally help you pop the ball out if needed, but at strength 3 it's likely to be a 1-die block at best. So maybe you just use your runner to score, to take the edge off a cage with hypno gaze and just strike when you need. And everything I've said about pro I'm not going to say again. It is going to give you a 3+ reroll for your Bloodlust, for your first failed dodge, for your second failed dodge if you've got the dodge, for that cheeky 1-die attempt, for your hypno gaze attempt. Pro is going to be super useful. It's just going to keep this team kicking. And with the vampire runner, you're not going to be sticking them in the thick of things. They are going to be your agile piece. And whether you've got 1 or 2 on your team, they are going to be hated by your opponents, and it's going to be wonderful fun. The vampires now have a big guy, the Vargeist, the Varg, the Bat Ogre. It's going to have many names, but it is just a big, hairy Yeti, basically. So, 150k, 0 to 1 on the roster, movement 5, strength 5, edge 4+. Okay, we're talking Minotaur, Ogre territory here. Passing nothing, it's fine. Armor 10+ is nice and resilient. So we've got Ogre stats on a Vargeist so far. Bloodlust, 3+. So everything we said about the Blitzer is true of the Vargeist. If you're going to be punching stuff, it's 2+ and you're good to go. If you're going to be moving around, it's a 3+. Now, why that is a little bit not the best, it's still better than some of the animal savagery pieces. So the Bloodspawn is looking at this guy and he's just like, enjoy your +1, mate. And I will. So Claws and Frenzy make the Vargeist a very tasty hitter. Strength 5 with Claws and Frenzy, you should be able to facilitate some wonderful 4-die blocks, maybe even 6-die blocks if you get some opportunistic hits in. That's a 2-die block followed by a 2-die block with Frenzy, and if you get Claws in the mix, you're going to be taking out basically anybody, whoever's you're targeting, which is magic. We've got regen on this piece, so regen, armor 10+, strength 5. He's going to be very resilient. Troll level resilience. The downside, the risk here is loner 4+. So all of your vampires, they've got Bloodlust. If they fail Bloodlust and they can't eat a Thrall, it's a turnover. Vampires are going to be living and dying using pro or rerolls to make sure that in that one sticky situation it doesn't happen. At some point you're going to run out of Thralls. At some point you're going to end up out of position and it's going to hurt you. And the fact that this loner 4+ is really going to hurt you if you need to move your Vargeist or hit and you roll that 1 and that's it. You can block or you can blitz and that's the end of your activation, and it's going to be the end of your turn. It's a massive risk, but it's only going to come up 1 in every 6 times, and that's assuming you don't have a Thrall. So the Vargeist is going to need almost permanent support when it comes to activating them when they're in a melee. Now that's going to be mostly fine because you can normally hide a Thrall to the left or the right and give him some support, maybe go for that sweet 6-die frenzy block. The downside is that frenzy means they have to follow up. So if you are blocking, not only do you have to think, where's my frenzy going to end me up for just, you know, your second block, but also where's my frenzy going to end me up so that at the end of my activation I can bite a dude. Because if you frenzy yourself out of position from your Thrall, it's a turnover and it's going to absolutely wreck you. But I think it's infinitely manageable to get the advantage of that 4-die Frenzy Claws block. You've got strength on a primary, so you're going for Brawler to make your combat more effective, Juggernaut to make your blitzes more effective, or Mighty Blow to make your removal more effective. Now, it doesn't stack with Claws, but it does mean that armor is broken on an 8+, and then you get +1 to the injury roll, so a 7+ KO, which basically works out as something like a 25% chance of removal against most players, which is wonderful because your Vargeist is going to be dropping dudes. If you block every turn and drop a guy every turn, he could remove maybe 4 pieces in the game, and that's definitely going to pay for him at 150k. On a double, obviously, pro, block, and a myriad of skills are great. Your Varg is not going to be scoring a huge amount of touchdowns, so it's going to be, do I take Jugs because I'm using him as my primary blitzer, my cruise missile, or do I give him Brawler to stay in the fight and just make him more reliable in combat? I mean, you've also got the potential of Guard to just give everyone around him a bit more strength. With the Varg, the best thing to do is probably save up for block or pro to keep him more active and keep him more resilient, but I guarantee most of you are going to go for Jugs to make him your cruise missile. And then you've got the food for the team. So the Thrall lineman, 0 to 16, movement 6, average, strength 3, average, edge 3+, average, passing 4+, not bad actually, armor 8+, average. For 40k, these players are a bargain. You've got the same stat line as Hobgoblins, and they are underrated. They are cheap at 40k. They punch as well as a human lineman. They do stuff as well as any human player without skills. So Thralls are fine. You can run a whole team of Thralls, and you'll actually have a chance at winning. They are vulnerable. They've got low armor, so they are going to be targeted by your opponents. And they are food. So while they have no skills, I have put the tagline in there, I am food. Because your vampires are going to be eating them and your opponent is also going to be trying to murder them. That's why when we look at our team rosters, we're going to see a heavy amount of Thralls be available for your roster. But at 40k, it's definitely achievable. And you are going to need 5 or 6 of them on the pitch at any time to make sure that your vampires can still go do stuff. If you think about most rosters, you think about Chaos, you think about Nurgle, you think about Khorne, you've got 4 or 5 wicked players on the pitch. Everybody else is chaff. They fill in the gaps, they just whatever. Vampires are going to be like that. It's just that your Thralls have got decent agility, decent movement, and actually on their own will be just fine. And there will be times where it's better to score a touchdown with a Thrall than it is a vampire because you don't want to risk Bloodlust. So your Thralls are not just mannequins to be beaten to death by your chompy boys, they are also really useful little players. So the Thralls are underrated, they are really useful. Now skills wise, it's alignment. Kick is great, block is great, it's going to keep them alive, wrestle's always fun, having a tackle piece is always fun. If you want to save it for a double, jump up is going to be useful because they're going to get chomped on. Thick skull is going to be useful because they're going to get chomped on. It's a lot of SPPs to use on a piece that is armor 8+ and it's probably going to die, but actually in the long run that's not a terrible thing. Ultimately though, they're alignment piece, so taking a random general as soon as you can, is just going to enhance your team, and maybe that guy lives a little bit longer than the rest, in theory. Okay, so that's all the pieces of the vampire team. We talked a little bit about skills, we talked a little bit about the function of them. There's a couple of other bits to cover just before we wrap up this video, and that is the star player access. Vampires are going to be interesting. Thralls are cheap. Core vampires are kind of pricey, so you're not often going to end up in a position where you're like, I've got loads of money to spend on inducements, but sometimes it's going to play up. So I thought we'd talk through who is available. You've got Gracken Crumbleberry if you want another bit of muscle for your team and a cheeky bit of sure hands and a one-turn touchdown approach. You've got Helmet Wolf just to cause visceral damage, and if you end up brewing up this roster so you've got a fair bit of guard, and you've also got Acorn as well, who is pretty good fun. But the Sylvanian Spotlight, that's where the good stuff is. So Gretchen will ignore her scrolls, kind of fun, but you don't need him because you've got a very good thrower on this roster. Wilhelm Chaney, again, this is where it starts to get interesting. So Wilhelm, was he 240? You're not often going to be able to afford him, but another movement 8 piece and this one having Frenzy and Claws can be really fun. I don't think you're going to need him quite as much because you can roster 2 vampire runners for the price of Wilhelm, but Wilhelm doesn't have a nega trait, so you've got that balance there. Bryce if you want more chainsawing, Frankenstein if you want a little bit more meat on the line. Not a top pick, I think. Ivan Deathshroud's going to be interesting if you're playing dwarves. He's quite cheap, a quite cheap piece of strength 4 muscle to go on the line and take hits and be hit is probably going to be useful in some league games. Count Luther, however, is where it gets real interesting. Count Luther is the star of stars. He's expensive and is prime for a tournament roster to be built around him. He's got no nega trait other than loner 4+. He's movement 6 or 7, he's strength 5, he's edge 2+, he's got skills. He is an awesome piece of equipment. So if you're not running him in your vampires, try and brew up a Necro roster or a Tomb Kings roster or something just to get Count Luther to the pitch, because he's like Griff, but better. A little slower, but better. And then you've got Captain Karina, who's a good mid-range star. A nice bit of Carla von Kill for your vampires. This is probably the best way to think about it. A nice high edge strength 4 piece. So if you want more mid-range vampire muscle, you've got Captain Karina. If you want to go all in on a star, you've got Count Luther. Everybody else is just going to fit in, and there's going to be some clever builds, but those would be my star players of choice. Okay, that is the Vampire Team Guard. I'm sorry that was a long video, but there's so much to talk about with the Vampire roster. Tons of great players, tons of clever plays to make. You may end up outmaneuvering yourself, which is going to be quite entertaining, but that's the kind of thing you can learn from. That's the kind of thing you can play around, and that's where I see vampires going. You're going to get lucky sometimes, you're going to get unlucky sometimes, but the more you play with them, the better you're going to get. So these guys are going to reward reps, and in a league, they're going to have that regen. They're going to be a little bit slow at times, but they are going to get there. And when you start getting a few skills on your vampires, they're going to start absolutely cooking and absolutely smashing. And I cannot wait to start running my team in league, because this is so good. Now, if you want to see some starting rosters or some tournament rosters, check the cards somewhere, because we've got those videos going up as well. And if you want to know more about the new Sylvanian stars, then we're going to have spotlight videos for those as well. So if you want to know more about vampires or any other Blood Bowl team, you are on the right channel. But for now, I'm going to disappear. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back soon with more Blood Bowl content. Happy Bloodlust. Thanks very much for watching. We really appreciate your support. If you want to support the channel even further, please like and subscribe. It really does help us out. Or come join us on YouTube members or in Patreon, where you can get exclusive access to some content, some loot, early access to basically everything we do, as well as regular competitions. Or you can pick up some Bonehead Podcast loot either on our website at boneheadpodcast.com. We've got the Dungeon Bowl things, we've got tokens and stuff like that, or on our Spreadshirt site as well. Everything you do just helps us make more content and hopefully do it of better quality. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Happy blocking.